Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Tech Chap. This is my review of the Sony Xperia Z3. This has taken me a little while to review. This was going to be my first review way back when. Unfortunately, this is my third Z3 for a number of different reasons, including the display being too blue on my first one and me actually destroying the second one. So this is the third one I've had, and that's why it's taken a little while to do this. But hopefully I can give you some good advice, a few tips about using it, and a full review. As always, I look forward to your comments and suggestions and feedback. Any questions you may have, please leave in the comments section below. And if you have any suggestions for devices you'd like to see me review, I'd love to hear from you. So let's get to it. Thank you for joining me for another hands-on in-depth review. This is the Z3. First impressions, well, it's incredibly premium looking. It's really, really nice. Front and back, we have Gorilla Glass 3. I think this is the only smartphone that actually features a glass rear plate. It's non-removable, of course, but it is very shiny, very pretty, and although actually probably not that fragile, considering it is Gorilla Glass, you get the impression that you might drop it, you might scratch it, you might shatter it, and although pretty, although premium, it does make it feel fragile and something you're not going to want to just throw about. I would recommend putting a case on this. Not only does it look premium, but it's also very slippy. It's very slippery to hold, and unless you've got a good firm grip on it, it's one of those things that is just going to fall out your hand, and as you put it in or pull it out of a pocket, I can imagine that quite a few people will drop this, so be careful with that, and I therefore would recommend putting a case on it. But this is carrying on with Sony's fairly standard omni-balance design that we've seen since I think the Z1 now. So we're pretty used to this. We're pretty used to its big bezels. But every single iteration we see, it's thinner, it's getting lighter, and it's just getting a whole lot nicer to use and hold. The corners are nice and rounded. We'll go on to a little bit later about the differences between this and the Z2. But the nice rounded corners mean it sits much more comfortably in your hand. It doesn't dig in particularly, and it's quite nice to hold and use. And because you can hold it quite easily and poke it into your palm, you get a good reach with your thumb. So the 5.2-inch display doesn't become quite so unwieldy. As we're used to with Sony though, we still do get these quite chunky bezels at the top and bottom. Now, I can't be too harsh because they do contain the stereo speakers, one at the top, one at the bottom, and that produces some great sound, which we'll discuss a little bit later. But at the same time, with a screen-to-body ratio of 71%, it's not really keeping up perhaps with the rest of the flagships, particularly say LG, in terms of trimming the bezel and reducing the overall footprint of the phone. Another thing to consider is that we do still have software buttons here. They aren't capacitive on the bezel, like in the Galaxy S5 or Note 4, for example. This seems a bit of a waste, although we obviously do have the speaker here. It's a shame that they couldn't just sort of incorporate these software buttons into capacitive buttons and make greater use of the bezel. But overall, the 5.2-inch 1080p screen is nice, although the colours are quite cool. I'd say it has a bluish tint. Again, we'll discuss that in further detail later. But it's not particularly punchy, it's not particularly vivid. If you're coming from a Samsung or you're used to using Samsung AMOLED displays, then you'll notice that this is quite muted in comparison. It definitely has a cooler look. On the back we have Sony's 20.7 megapixel camera. The positioning is a little awkward because with the shutter button placed here, you're quite likely to hold the camera like this to take a picture, and in doing so, quite often, not always, but quite often you'll see your finger covering up some of the lens, if not all of it. It's not the ideal placement, and perhaps putting it in the center like many other phones would have been a better idea, but as you can see here, I have a good grip here and it's not covering it at this point, but if I were to get a firmer grip, you can see just how quickly you can cover it. So 20.7 megapixels does sound a lot, and given that we have a dedicated shutter button, would indicate that Sony have put a lot of effort into the camera and have ensured that we have a really good camera here. Unfortunately, that's not really the case. I'll show you later that in fact the Z3 offers fairly standard, fairly average photos. It's definitely subpar compared to some other flagships, and it's a bit of a shame given that we have 20.7 megapixels, which just shows that megapixels do not mean everything. Fortunately, the UI is nice and responsive, it's nice and fast. Underneath we have a Snapdragon 801 clocked at 2.5 GHz and 3 GB of RAM, so we're still getting fantastic speed. It's not quite the top end processor anymore. We do have the Snapdragon 805 and soon to be the 810, but on a 1080p display it's going to be giving it as much power as we need. One of the key features of the Z3, and following on from the Z2, is in fact its battery performance. This has a 3100 milliamp battery, non-removable, which is actually 100 milliamps less than the Z2. Despite this is, I would say, the best in class for battery life. You can get a solid 2 days of moderate use out of this, and it probably verges on maybe twice the battery performance of the iPhone 6. So it really is one of the key selling features here, although as we will see later, the camera doesn't quite live up to what we'd expect. The battery absolutely does, and it's one of the biggest features that this phone offers. On the sides of the device we have the usual ports and micro SD and SIM card slots. These are all covered by flaps, which are nice and flush with the device, meaning you get a nice smooth feel to it. I'll pull these open for you. You have to get a nail in, it's a little bit difficult, but under this one on the left side we have the micro USB port for charging, and on the other we have, you can see it's a little bit difficult, we have the nano SIM card, so make note that that is nano SIM, so make sure you have one of those if you're buying this, and a micro SD slot up to 128 gigabytes. Now we have to be very careful that we do press these back in firmly, because it's this what makes the whole device water and dust proof. I say proof, it goes beyond dust resistance and water resistance, but as we'll find out later, I'm not sure I trust that particularly. And finally we have the usual Bluetooth 4, NFC, Wi-Fi AC, micro USB 2 and 3.5mm headphone jack. So pretty standard all around there. Now this is a Z3 review video. This is not a Z2 versus Z3 comparison, so I won't go into too much detail about the differences, but given how similar they are and how they only came out about 6 months apart, and how the Z2 being quite a bit cheaper than the Z3 could be an alternate option for you if you wish to buy a phone, I'll just run through very quickly the main features and the main differences between them. First and foremost, it is just an improved design. The ergonomics are improved, and it's significantly more comfortable to hold based on these rounded corners. These are a lot less rounded in the Z2, and actually I haven't owned a Z2, but I have used one, and they can become a bit uncomfortable. So overall this is a lot more comfortable to use, and that's probably the main improvement. In addition, it is 11 grams lighter and 0.9 millimeters thinner, so overall it's just a bit more svelte and a little bit more premium looking. It's got a slightly faster processor inside. It's a step up from the AB variant of the Snapdragon 801 to the 8C, and basically what that means is this is a 2.5 gigahertz processor as opposed to the 2.3 in the Z2. Does that make a difference? I very much doubt it. I'm sure we'll see a slight improvement in the benchmarks, but it doesn't make a difference, I suspect, in real practice, and certainly I haven't noticed any difference between using both of them. Finally, we do have a slightly improved camera on the back. It can go up to 12,800 ISO, although I'm not sure I'd recommend even using that because it'll be incredibly noisy. There's a new 25mm G lens, which apparently will offer slightly better picture quality, and there's a slightly improved digital image stabilization. And surprisingly, the battery capacity is actually 100 milliamps smaller than the Z2, which had 3200. So, but despite this, and presumably as a result of efficiency gains in hardware and software, we're actually getting a slightly better, if not basically the same battery life. So, but still best in class. Anyway, moving on to more detail with the display, we have a 5.2-inch 1080p IPS LCD display. This uses Sony's Triluminous and X-Reality technologies, commonly seen in the Bravia TVs. This is mostly just marketing buzzwords. It is unfortunately far from the nicest screen you can find on a smartphone. It can be very bright, up to 600 nits. I'll show you very quickly just how bright this can get, and it completely is washed out at this on this camera. But this is one of the brightest smartphones you can get. So if you're someone who uses a smartphone outside a lot, or you're in a lot of direct sunlight, then that's going to be a definite plus for you. In addition, we do have 424 ppi. That's what that resolution works out to. So it's pretty sharp. It's not quite as sharp as we're coming to see with some Quad HD display screens these days, but it's still very good, and you're not going to see any pixels. So it's really nice and sharp and really nice and bright. But it's let down on the colors. It is unmistakably bluish. It's a cool tint to the device. So it's a shame that although this is quite a nice display, the colors are so muted and there is such a blue tint to it. You can, if you go to display, actually adjust the white balance. That's quite a nice feature to have, but you can't. Essentially, what I want to be able to do is drag the blue left a bit and decrease it to make the screen a bit more neutral, a bit less blue tinted. But some people recommend with a certain combination of red and green, you can, perhaps even like that, you can get a slightly more accurate white. It doesn't obviously improve the vividness or the punch of the screen. That's something that, just compared to Samsung's AMOLED, is just not really in the same league. Perhaps it is slightly more natural, but it is unmistakably a bit blue and a bit bland, and it's not really something you want to show off. It's by no means bad, it's just other devices do offer a slightly nicer display, and even the viewing angles aren't fantastic. You can see that the color and the brightness very quickly fade out. Now, as we discussed, this is running the Snapdragon 801 2.5 GHz version and has 3 gigs of RAM, so you're not going to have any problems with multitasking or having a lot of apps open or apps in the background. You're not going to feel like you're going to have to clear all as often as you might on a device with less RAM. It's just one of those things where if you know you have a bit more than you need, then it becomes less of a concern, something you don't think about as much. So definitely having 3 GB is nice to have. In benchmarks, it doesn't really make any difference, but perhaps just for peace of mind, knowing that you don't have to close all your apps as often, it's a nice feature to have. Everything looks really nice, it's all really nice and fast, there's no visible lag, no stutter or responsiveness issues. Everything is nice and lovely. Not that you should have any concerns of a phone of this level. This is definitely still a flagship phone and you're paying top-end money for it, so you wouldn't be expecting to have any performance issues. But this is just to prove that there certainly isn't, and that you'll have no problems playing all the hard, intensive games that you want to. So now, one of the main other features of the Z3 and the Z series actually is the stereo speakers. I would say they're not quite as good as the HTC Boom Sound speakers I just find on the HTC One and One M8, but I'd say it's second only to that. They are very, very good. I'll just play a little bit of music for you. This is some music that's already on the device when you get it, default, so it probably still isn't license free, but if I just play a bit, it doesn't matter. So it's quite bassy, it's quite rich, it's good highs, good mids. Perhaps if you put it down, you get some more bass. Get a bit more bass that way. So unlike most other flagships or other smartphones, particularly from LG and Samsung, it's really nice to see front-facing stereo speakers. It's great for watching movies, watching YouTube videos, and just makes the audio quality so much nicer. Audio is one of those things that is usually relegated to the back of smartphones, so it's nice to see them up front. And Sony go a little bit further in terms of audio. They offer some unique software that, if we go to the sound settings, you'll see that there is option for Clear Audio Plus. This is something I'd recommend having on. It does give all sound, both in headphone mode and speaker mode, an extra bit of oomph, but it's sort of optimized for what's coming out, so whether it's games or music. So it just makes everything a bit louder, a bit nicer, a bit richer, so I'd recommend having that on. There's also, you can also use the digital noise cancellation headphones, which combined with the software and hardware I think in this phone basically give you noise cancel headphones, but they only work with the bundled Sony headphones that come in the box. Now, one thing I didn't mention on the side is this big cutout here. It allows you to dock it with Sony's magnetic charging cradle, and I went to the extra trouble to acquire one just so I could show you how it works. So essentially this is plugged in via a standard micro USB on the back, so the same sort of cable you'd use to charge the phone. And although it is a bit flimsy, perhaps you might want to put some blue tack on the back to keep it stuck down, perhaps to your bedside table or wherever you want to charge it. You then simply slide in, or drop in if you wish, the phone, and that charges it. You're getting a full charge, and it puts it in quite a unique horizontal mode. Then you can use a phone like this. So it's quite nice to have this at the side of your bed. Perhaps if you have it off, notifications will come up and you can see what's going on. It'd be good to use as an alarm clock. It's just quite a nice little feature, and a bit quite unique to this phone. But perhaps if you're not using that, this may be a little bit of an eyesore. Perhaps you'll feel it a little bit, but I do use this. It's only about £20, so maybe $25, $30. And it actually makes the whole process of charging a lot easier. It means you don't have to constantly take this flap open every time you want to charge it, which over the months and maybe years could degrade the quality of the seal and make the phone less waterproof. So it's not only is it quicker to charge this way, but perhaps you're preserving how waterproof it is for a longer period of time. So it's just simple, slide in and charge. So let's go into a little bit more detail about the cameras. On the back we have this 20.7 megapixel camera. On the front we have a 2.2 megapixel camera. The front can video up to full HD 1080p, and the back can record up to 4K. Now the problem with 4K recording here is that you're limited to 5 minutes of recording. That's probably based on the fact that the whole device gets quite hot as you do it, so it's going to be throttling how long you get to do it for. So you get 5 minutes of maximum 4K recording. It does make the device hot. Obviously 4K does take up a lot of room in terms of storage, so you're definitely going to need a external SD card for that. Although personally I would actually still stick with the 1080p 60 FPS mode that this camera can do, as opposed to 4K. It allows you to have better image stabilization and access to more features and unlimited recording time. So 4K for now. I think this is a bit of a gimmick on this device, and it's not something that I think you'll be using that often, beyond perhaps just wants to show it off. But if we jump into the camera, you'll see it loads up nice and quickly. We get a nice big display viewfinder, and again I've just covered the corner of the camera lens there, so remember it's there. And we have this dedicated shutter button here, so I can just demonstrate to you now that this works nice and quickly, nice and easy, and it allows you to have a good grip on the phone. It is quite slippery, and so being able to hold it with 2 hands and still take a picture without having to, reach down to press the software button here means it's quite a nice feature. Now the main problem here is that most people will use it in this mode, which is called Superior Auto mode. Now that actually reduces the number of megapixels that it uses from 20.7 down to 8. So using it in this mode, which most people will, because most people don't want to be messing with ISO settings and exposure, you're only going to be taking 8 megapixel cameras. So the fact that this is 20.7 becomes a bit redundant, although not completely, because I do believe that they are in fact oversampling the photos, so you get a slightly sharper, slightly crisper, more reduced noise photo in the end. And as I'm sure you're aware, megapixels aren't everything, and 8 really is enough. Now if we switch from Superior Auto to manual mode, which I do recommend you do, it just provides so many more features, including HDR and image stabilization, which I recommend having on. The other issue is if you do go back to manual mode, you are allowed access to more megapixels, up to the full 20.7, although that is an only 4:3 aspect, which for me isn't ideal. I prefer to take my pictures in 16:9 or widescreen, which if you want that option reduces you down to 15.5 megapixels. So it's just a bit annoying that although it's advertised at 20.7, in reality you're going to be probably using either 15 or 8 megapixels. I left this on auto mode while I took a few pictures. I went to London over the weekend and I thought I'd take some photos to show you the performance of the camera in quite literally the real world. But this is not in a lab or testing environment. This is just how it looks on a day-to-day basis. So the problem is these photos, as you can see, they're not brilliant overall. Whites in the clouds are blown out. There's not really any detail at all in them. Colors are quite dull. Even low light photos are noisy. They lack detail. There's just lots of noise. In well lit pictures, it can be reasonably detailed, like this one. In fact, this actually looks quite nice. I think overall you can see it's just sort of lacks punch. It lacks color. It's not particularly pleasant, and other cameras particularly the G3 and the Note 4. Similarly with videos, the white, the grey sky, there's no detail there, it's all blown out. You can see some mild chromatic aberration on some of the walls, despite the fact that I'm standing still. And overall, although it is relatively stabilized when I'm walking around, it's not particularly punchy again. It's just not overly nice. It's not crisp, it's not colourful. Now, if we talk about the UI a little bit more, as I've shown you, there is no performance issues at all. Everything loads nice and fast. Everything is super smooth and really nice to use. This is still running on Android 4.4. I haven't got Lollipop just yet, But the features are really nice. There's some nice pre-installed apps. The Walkman app is quite nice to use if you do put music locally, and there's some nice widgets that you get access to that are defaultly on the home screen. So the UI generally is really nice. The settings menus are clear and well laid out, and it's just a pleasure to use. One of the things I personally really like is the live wallpaper themes you get with Sony Xperia. If you go to the themes, and you get the option of all these colors, or in fact you can choose it to randomize which color and theme you use. So if I apply that and I go back to the home screen, you can see this is now nice and orange. Turning this off and on, and the day goes by, this will change color between black and orange and yellow and red and purple and blue. It's quite nice to see. Now, staying with the UI, there's a couple of nice features I'd like to talk to you about. First of all is the double tap to wake, which is quite useful. You can't double tap again to turn it off, but it works quite well and quite consistently, so it's nice to be able to just do that. But a few other phones are doing that now as well. But more interestingly is the remote play, which is one of the big selling points of the Z3. Now, although this was originally unique to the Z3, through unofficial apps, I think any Android phone above, I think Android 4.2 can actually use it now. The Z3 is, I think, probably the best device you want to use to access remote play. So you can see here that the PS4 controller works perfectly well. I can play online games. I don't have any issues with the internet. I have quite a fast broadband speed. I get approximately 7 megabit download and about 0.5 up. So if you start the app on the phone, it's pre-installed on the Z3. It takes about 30 seconds or so, maybe a bit less, to search for the nearby PS4s. I've pre-registered the controller and the PS4 to speed this process up. And you can see in the background there, it's notified me that I'm connected via the Z3. So it comes up, everything looks good. I have the controller here. I hadn't turned it on at this point, so but you can see it's connected, it's all live, it's working. If I turn the controller on, that immediately links, and you can see I can now control it from the controller. So it looks good, but then instantly connection's lost. And I'm about 2 feet from the PS4 at this point, and it's just lost. So even though I have a decent connection, I wouldn't say I have super fast broadband, but this is actually the third Z3 I've tried this on, and none of them have worked well. I haven't even got into a game, and showing you again the second time, it's the exact same issue. I get artifacting and then connection lost. So it simply doesn't work for me. It might for you though. Now finally, this is supposed to be waterproof. It's IP65 and 68 dust and waterproof. And I say proof, and I emphasize proof because it goes beyond water resistance, which other products like the Samsung Galaxy S5 claim to have. According to Sony, it is definitely waterproof, assuming all the ports and covers are closed firmly. That's fine, and dust tight. And it's also protected against low pressure jets of water, in compliance with the IP65. And it can be kept underwater for up to 1.5 meters for up to 30 minutes, in compliance with the IP68. I decided to test how waterproof this was in just a bowl of water, and I put probably about 10 inches of water in it, and I just laid it in there. Wasn't doing anything particularly, wasn't shooting jets of water at it or anything, and everything was fine. It sort of started using the screen without me touching it. Clearly the water wasn't having an effect on the capacitive screen. It was pressing things without me doing it, but overall it was all looking fine. And I took it out, dried it off, and it was all working well until it started becoming a bit less responsive, and the screen started flicking on and off, and I wasn't quite sure why. I made sure it was completely dry, and of course I did make sure all these flaps were closed securely before I did this. I put the phone to my ear, and I could hear quite a distinct fizzing noise, which is never a good thing inside a phone. It was like so clearly it was the water had got in somehow. I don't know how. I was careful with closing the ports, and the jack at the top is allowed to be open, of course. There's no option to close it. It must be insulated from inside. So it fizzed away, and eventually the screen just stopped working. It just went completely dead. I tried charging it, hard resetting it, everything I could possibly do, but it was still working, the phone, because my alarm went off a few hours later, and presumably I could still be interacting with it, but in a screen off state. So it was essentially dead, and I had to send that back. So this is my third Z3, and the point of that story is, although this is waterproof, and as again emphasizing proof according to Sony, I don't buy it on that basis because in my experience, and it is just my experience of course, it really isn't, and it cost me a phone. So bear that in mind, and perhaps don't rush to show off just how waterproof it is by dropping it in your pint or throwing it in your sink as soon as you get it. Be a little bit careful, and because that didn't work for me. So it's a shame that with so much potential, the Z3 does let us down a little bit when it comes down to the display and the camera. The PS4 remote play didn't work for me. I'm sure it may work for you. Hopefully it does. Unfortunately, I can't give you a detailed opinion on how well the PS4 remote play works because it just simply doesn't work for me. Also, the waterproof feature, I would be very careful about putting this in water. This is certainly not going to be touching water anytime soon. So I wouldn't describe this phone as rugged by any means. It's a really nice build, it's really nice in the hand, it is slippery, so I'd recommend getting a case. Gorilla Glass 3 at the front and back really makes this device look and feel quite premium. It's something that I'm a big fan of, and I think compared to devices like the Galaxy S5, this looks so much nicer. It's just a shame that the camera and the display let it down a bit. Performance is fantastic, no issues there at all. Speakers are great, second probably only to the HTC One. So would I buy one? Well, no, essentially. Although there are a lot of pros to it, there's a lot of good features, and unfortunately I don't think the Z4 will be released at the Mobile World Conference in February. I think because the Z3 came out in September or October, I believe, it may come out a little bit later, the sequel to this. So if you do want a Sony phone, obviously this is the one to get. There's just a couple of too many issues for me, and a lot of what's been marketed about why this is so good, including the 4K recording, which is limited to 5 minutes and heats the phone up considerably. Just too many things let me down and aren't quite as described. So for those reasons, I perhaps wouldn't recommend buying this phone, and it's a shame because otherwise the design is really top end and really nice. So hopefully next time will be better. But I hope this has been a helpful review for you, and as always, I'd love it if you would comment, like, and maybe even subscribe to my videos. Any suggestions you have for future reviews would be great, and if you put them in the comments, I will reply to you as quick as possible. And thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.